All right. So any questions from anything last time or anything we anything we've reviewed up to this point? So you should see up, it should be accessible starting with this week's, the next writing assignment, which is called The Virtues in Media. The goal of this one is I want you to pick a character from some form of media. It can be TV, film, written media, something like that. I want you to outline how they are virtuous or not virtuous. How do they exercise at least the four virtues, the four cardinal virtues that we should have completed by at least the end of next week? How is it that they practice them, or how is it that they don't practice them? And be able to point to examples of saying that. Don't just say, well, they're just. How are they just? How do they exercise that? How do they exemplify that in what they do? So full details are on the assignment on the Canvas page. So read up on that. If you are having issues in all of that, please let me know. Part of your participation assignment for this week will be that you need to tell me, so by next Monday, tell me who you're doing. So at least take this week to decide who and where that you're going to do for that, and then you'll at least get 1 point on your participation assignment, if nothing else. Any immediate questions on any of that? Good. So we have looked at two of the four cardinal virtues already. We've looked at temperance and we have looked at prudence. So now we dive into the virtue that is perhaps most sought after or the most discussed in our own day. And that is justice. What did we say? What was the short definition of justice that we offered when we were beginning to talk about them? Anybody remember? I'm frantically looking back. Anybody remember what it was? What was the short definition of just what is justice? You start memorizing your notes better. Right relations with others. Right relations with others. That's a short definition, of course. Justice is right relations with others. Another way to describe justice is given by the Catholic theologian Thomas Aquinas, who says that justice is about giving to each their due. So giving to each individual, giving to each person, what is their due? What are they owed? But of course, that question, what is due to the other? It's one thing that we want to care and be concerned about ourselves. And it's temperance about how we use things, prudence about what we need to do for ourselves. Justice begins to turn us outside of ourselves, toward the other. But if justice is concerned with giving each their due, what is due to them? What is it that we owe, or what is it we are obliged to give to the other? And it depends on your understanding of all of these things that we do. Justice is very much an external matter, though it may affect us internally as well. But it very much comes out in our actions towards others, what we do or what we don't do towards them. The German philosopher Immanuel Kant thought that justice, among other things, was a part of what he called the categorical imperative, that one acts only according to that maxim, whereby you can at the same time will that something, whatever it is, should be a universal law. Meaning that though there, in his opinion, there were not universal laws, there are some things that we should act as if they are. So things he would say such as equality, equity, responsibility, or respect. There's not something to actually appeal to, but we must, as it were, almost create it wholesale in our minds. But if that's the case, then we can destroy them easily as well. If there is nothing universal to appeal to, especially in matters of justice, then we can create and destroy whatever we think is due to the other person. But yet, if there is something deeper and higher than anything we think of or anything we create, then that is what we must appeal to and begin to apply, especially in matters of justice. Why are we concerned with this? Aristotle describes human beings as being social animals. We are not just surrounded by other human beings. We are shaped by our interactions with them, more so than other creatures, even those that live rather in communal settings. We influence and shape each other. We influence and shape the ideas and understandings that we have. We are where we are today because of other people, just as much as because of our own inquisitiveness or desire to learn, or desire to understand, or desire to appreciate. All of these things are because we are social animals. Even in the midst of being locked down or being isolated, we strive for that society, that community. Hence, since we are social, we need to be concerned with how we treat others and to be concerned with how they treat us. What's the golden rule? Anybody know? What was that which is always called the golden rule? Yes. Or as it comes from Jesus himself, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So what is due to them is the same that you would ask that they give to you. No more, no less. But how is it that we can understand how to pursue justice? How is it that we can, what are the principles by which we can begin to apply all of these things? There are kind of two basic ideas today on how to do that. The first is called utilitarianism. Utilitarianism, simply put, is doing the greatest good for the greatest number. Now that sounds rather simple, right? Sounds even rather just. In one sense, it could be. But more often than not, it is easy to apply that principle of utilitarianism, that principle of the greatest good for the greatest number, to say that we can, in some cases, be unjust towards people. Because something greater is supposedly being achieved by going beyond that. And while some may suffer, but more will be helped. Mr. Spock puts it in a positive way when he says the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. And that is true in a rather altruistic, charitable way, but others may use that to justify treating others cruelly, terribly, unjustly. Many who think that slavery of any type is a good thing will justify as well those people who are slaves, for whatever reason. Yes, their lot is rather terrible. They have to work beyond, they don't work necessarily for a wage. But at the same time, what they're doing benefits the overall population. So we're doing the greatest good that we can. And in the face of that, how can we challenge that? How can we say, well, no, that's not really true? We can do that with the other principle to understand and apply in applying justice, and that is the principle of the common good. What is the common good? The common good is, in the first place, the sum total of social conditions that allow people, whether groups or individuals, to reach their fulfillment more fully and more easily. The common good, I'll repeat that, is the sum total of social conditions which allow people, whether groups or individuals, to reach their fulfillment more fully and more easily. So in applying this principle of the common good to that slavery issue, there's this group that's enslaved. The utilitarians will say, well, we have to do it. It's the easiest, it's the greatest good for the greatest number. The common good principle would say, no, it is not. It's not merely some sort of bell graph system like, well, this is the greatest good, so that's what we can reach. We're just going to aim for that. No, it is aiming for the sum total of good, for all to receive the good. Yes, maybe that means some don't receive as good as they can get, but it strives to avoid injustice or inequity. We can see utilitarianism would say everything is just an addition problem. So, there are 100 people that are very good. There are maybe 75 that are doing okay. But then there are 0 who are free of evil. We'll say, well, that's just, we add it all up. It's very good. It's very fine. It's the highest number we can reach. Whereas in the common good, it sees it more as a multiplication problem. The balance of very good, and doing not so well, and those doing awful. And what happens when you multiply anything by 0? It's always 0. As long as there is anyone left out or deprived of what is essential to them in the common good principle, the common good has been betrayed and is not being achieved. Why? Because it's not merely a statistical perspective. In talking of morality from the perspective of morality for happiness, all are meant to pursue that happiness. That means, therefore, that we can't ignore the happiness or the fulfillment of others. We may have to temper, perhaps, our fulfillment or our happiness. But that's to bring it up for others. Anybody remember the Occupy Wall Street protests of a few years ago? People were clamoring, saying, stand up for the 99% or fight the 1%. Seeing immense inequality between the very rich and the not so rich. And there is some point in that in looking at the common good. When money, wealth, or power are concentrated in the hands of a few, it is usually to the disadvantage of the many. I've been seeing that in the past year. Many of the tech companies have seen profits through the roof, right? Amazon is now like the wealthiest or like top 3 wealthiest companies in the world. Yet many of its employees struggle to make a basic living. That's more of a utilitarian principle. Well, those workers can do something else or just get by. But everybody else is doing fine. customers, the company. And that common good principle says, no, we need to treat the workers as well as we want to treat the customers or treat the executives. How, and why, and we'll get into some of this in subsequent classes. But it's important to apply this principle more of the common good over and against utilitarianism. This is a very easy temptation to fall into. And we can do it in our own personal way, in our own personal lives. It doesn't have to necessarily happen on a grand scale or on national scales. It can happen individually as well. We can be mean or mistreat individuals. But be nice to the rest of them and say, well, I've done the greatest good I can. Or we can be called to give each what is due to them, even if they are one that we do not like, or we hate, or we despise, or one who is vehemently against us. The virtue of justice is concerned with mutual enrichment. Why? Because justice does not only apply to individuals, it applies to groups as well. And any sort of group you can think of. What are some groups you could think of that justice would apply to? Any ideas? Still too early on a Monday morning to think? What about athletic teams? You need justice there, right? How the coaches treat the players, how the players treat one another, how the players treat the coaches, how they treat their opponents. Others? How about where we are? University? All right? How the professor treats the students, how the students treat the professor. How the administration treats the students, how the administration treats the professors, how the professors, right? It all goes together. Why? Because groups are made of individual human beings. And we cannot separate that fact. Though there may be corporate persons, corporations or groups that are so big or so heavy that they are treated rather as a legal person in some way, they are still composed of human beings. They are no better or no different than each one of us. How we treat ourselves, how we treat our families, how we treat our friends, how we treat strangers. It's the same in groups. And of course, the most obvious group, societies, communities, on however big or grand a scale, whether the smallest town in the smallest county, or the largest nation in the world, or in fact, even the whole world, right? In a certain way, we have the United Nations, the UN, concerned as much as possible with adjudicating justice around the world. Justice is very much a modern appraised virtue in modernity because it's the one thing that we all struggle with, perhaps on a greater scale than any of the other virtues. Most of us are temperate in one way or another. Right? We may struggle with small bouts of temperance, but that usually applies to just myself. We may struggle with prudence, but again, that normally applies just to myself. Justice is far bigger because of its communal nature, its external nature as well. How I treat someone, whoever that someone is, whatever they are, doesn't just affect me or affect that other person. It echoes across all of society. The actions of one, especially in the virtue of justice, have a ripple effect. Right? You throw a rock into the pond, it ripples throughout the rest of the pond. So too with our actions or inactions concerning justice. Take the classic example in school, bullying, right? We're told not to bully. We're told to respect others or to respect the differences of others. And yet, people still engage in that activity. Why do people bully? What might be some reasons people bully?
They can be jealous.
They can be jealous. Yes, they can be. They can be jealous. Others?
Want to feel better about themselves.
Want to feel better about themselves? Yes. The classic example of the bully who has a terrible life at home, but at school, he makes something of themselves. Other reasons? Other thoughts? Some do it because they want to express their superiority or supposed superiority. Classic example, jock versus nerd, right? But all of that is done in a spirit of injustice. Why? Because first of all, we cannot say that justice is equal to equality. Those are two different principles. We may have as our goal the idea of equality. That though people are different, there is something fundamental within themselves that makes human beings equal to each other. That's not the same as justice. Equality may be the principle whereby we apply justice. To say, well, what is due to everyone? What is due to everyone is that all are equal. That there are no real differences to the point where I can say, well, you all are kind of regular human, you all are just so different human. Justice, no matter what, is about giving each their due. And in some cases, some, whether individuals or groups, are due more than others. Not in the sense that saying that means that they are better or higher or more. We owe a lot more due respect, right relation to our government than we do to individuals, right? Or am I wrong? We cannot confuse these two principles, justice and equality. Equality may be the goal towards which we enact justice, or equality may be the principle that animates, kind of the common good translated out. So we must be aware not to try to confuse the two. Whatever the principles, though, we are still all called to act justly. How is it, though, that we give out justice in a communal way? Not necessarily like what I do, what we as individuals do. What is the way that we use to help try to mete out justice, especially in organizations? Ideas? What's that? Perhaps. But how can we be able to do that? Call them out on what? I wasn't meaning on that, but we can kind of do that. How do organizations run? What is it that animates them to be able to corral people together and to act for a common purpose? We form rules, right? Almost every organization has some form of rules. Whether it is your little university club, whether it's the university itself, whether it's the government. Everything has rules, right? Written or at times unwritten. Organizations very much have written rules. Society often has unwritten rules, right? Customs, manners, things like that. What is the purpose of a rule? Why is it we should be so concerned? Or why is it we almost seek naturally for rules?
So that people don't get hurt, people don't get broken, and things don't get broken.
Yes, and a minimum to avoid damage, whether to others or whether to things. Other thoughts, other ideas? Why is it we engage in rules? It's a very natural thing. If you go to the school playground, the elementary school playgrounds, the kids will spend time ironing out the rules and applying the rules on their own for any sort of game they play. Kickball, foursquare, soccer, baseball, whether they understand the rules as regularly played or whether they're making up their own game. It's a natural instinct within us when we gather together, when it's more than just me or when they're more just even me and someone else. And as the group gets bigger, to help us with justice, we enact rules. It is almost a natural function that happens. Now, of course, we can debate on how well those rules are lived out or observed, but there can be no doubt how quickly and how easily it is rules are organized. We do that at every level. What are they called at the highest level, at the governmental level? When they're passed through Congress and signed by the president, what are they called? Nobody remembers their Schoolhouse Rock? Well, when the bill gets signed, what's it become? It becomes a law. Yes. Oh. Just speaking in general. I know it's not a politics class, but the highest form of rules we have are laws. They carry with them serious penalties. Some of them, in particular cases even, carry the ultimate penalty, death, depending on what jurisdiction you're in at least. Rules in and of themselves are not the goal. Rules are not the goal that in and of which we pursue. The rules, though, help us to pursue justice. Right? I have the particular rules that I have for this class. Why? So that we may treat each other justly in the pursuit of knowledge, understanding, discourse, the exchange of minds. The university has rules, not merely to be obeyed. That's the morality of obligation. Rules are just the boundary to keep us from harming each other, they'll say. But no, in the morality of happiness, rules help us to flourish. Rules help us to become what we are supposed to be, to find and reach our fulfillment, which ultimately brings about our happiness, whether temporary or eternal. But these rules exist, proliferate, when done properly and justly, to help bring about justice. It is when they become abused or when they are used, or rather misused, that they can become unjust. Just because something is a rule or a law does not mean it's necessarily just. Right? There can often be that perspective. Well, that's the rules. Them's the rules. You just got to do it. No, that's not the case. Rules don't exist for themselves. They exist to help us achieve justice. If they do not do that, they can and must be changed. Right? It was on the law that slavery, based completely on race, was legal in this country. Right? That was a law. That was a law written in the Constitution and the thing. Does that make it right, though? Of course not. Hence why people fought all that law and the laws associated with it, and eventually got it changed.
Well, we got back to that when we got split up at the end of the 19th century with the Jim Crow laws.
Well, that's That's not slavery, that's segregation, that's a different thing. Now you're right though, it's still wrong. And those laws were overturned as well, slowly through the court systems and through civil action. Just because something is a rule or a law does not make it just. We must order our rules, order our laws toward justice. Whatever we say the principle of justice is. If we discern and understand that something is actually wrong, then we must take every effort to do that. We commemorated 2 weeks ago the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right? Who was protesting against those laws of segregation. That separate but equal is not actually equal and not actually right and not actually just. Through his work, through his civil protests, civil resistance, usually nonviolent resistance, he helped bring about a change in those laws. Now, of course, the more difficult change is not rules or laws. The more difficult change in trying to bring about justice is to change the human person, to change hearts. Rules are easily changeable. Laws are easily amendable. It is the human heart that is the hardest to change. To convince someone that some action that they are doing is unjust and therefore they need to stop doing it. Why? Because we are proud creatures. Who always think that we know everything, and that doesn't matter what age we're at. Always the complaint of the elderly against you all, that, oh, you all think you know everything. You know what? So do they. In some ways, they may be correct. In some ways, you may actually know better than them. It depends on many factors. Who's to say? It is changing human hearts. Rules and laws are enacted to help identify what we think is just. Or at least the kind of foundation of justice. Not everything, not the totality. Why? Because the state can't monitor or mandate everything. Do we really want Big Brother watching everything? We can do the big work of bringing about justice on a corporate scale. It's much more difficult to do it on an individual scale. What we think is right, what we think is just, what we do. The principles that may animate our justice, which rightly so for many people may be some idea of equality or equity perhaps. But in that encounter with the other, we must recognize and acknowledge that there is someone different than us. In a good way, in a bad way, but someone different than us. Whether they are smarter than us, whether they are not as knowledgeable as us, whether they are stronger than us, whether they are weaker than us. If we want to pursue justice, we must change ourselves most of all. Why? Because who is the one person that you can control? Who's the one person you have absolute dominion over? Yourself. I don't have absolute dominion over you. I only have a limited influence as far as this class, as far as this material, as far as the time that we have together. But I have full and total, complete dominion over myself. Do you control my actions? Not every moment of every day, do you? Right. Nor I with you. But if we want the world to be as we think it is, it must begin from us. The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If you want the world to be just, it has to begin with you. It doesn't begin with governments. It doesn't begin with societies. It begins inside of us and then comes out. So in beginning to look at justice, we must look and see, what do we say is actually justice? What does it mean to be just? What does it mean to give others their due? Am I pursuing the common good for myself and for others? Or maybe utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number. Or, more often what may happen, the greatest good for the most important number. Number one, me. Because often that is how we pervert justice, or how we pervert utilitarianism. I'm not really concerned with giving what others are due to them. But if I treat them well, they should treat me well. That morality of obligation, right? That comes out most of all in justice, in the pursuit, in the exercise of justice. So we will be looking at and pursuing how it is we can exercise justice on a communal scale and even within ourselves. To begin to apply those things so that we may then be what we are supposed to be. Not because of a rule, not because of a law, but because of what we fundamentally hold in our minds, in our souls, in our hearts. So, comments, thoughts, ideas, challenges on any of that so far? Nothing, Nathan, nada? Clear as mud? Good. So, next class, we will be looking at what specifically is a law, how we can begin to determine what is a just or unjust law, and types of justice between individuals, between groups, between corporations. So, be ready to look at and to pursue all of that on